For 38 years I fed other people's children at that university, and I never once sat in a single class. My name is Thelma Boyd, and on the night my own daughter told me to be quiet, I was 66 years old, a widow, and the head cook nobody in that dining hall could get through a single morning without. We were gathered around Renee's long glass table, celebrating my granddaughter Alicia getting into the very school where I had spent my whole working life behind a serving counter. I had carried two things with me that evening. One was a worn leather box that held my mother's recipes and a small ledger of quiet debts. The other was the habit of a woman who had kept a blessing box tucked behind her counter for longer than my daughter had drawn breath. That box had held receipts the good Lord never once let me see paid back. Sitting at that shining table, I did not yet know those receipts were about to come due in front of thousands of people, under an open spring sky, with my name read out loud. Renee reached across and slid the financial aid folder away from me before I could finish what I was saying. "Mama," she said, and she wore the tight little smile she saved for people she believed were slow. "You're too uneducated to understand this. Please, just stay out of it." The room went still. My son-in-law found something fascinating in his plate. Alicia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, and her eyes went wide and young and unsure. Somewhere across from me sat an empty chair with a folded napkin on it, the chair my Walter used to fill before the Lord called him home, and I felt the shape of his absence press against my ribs. I did not raise my voice. I have never once in my life raised my voice at that girl. I only folded my hands in my lap, the same hands that had cracked 10,000 dozen eggs and stitched loose buttons back onto boys who could not afford a tailor. And I let the silence sit there, where my words used to be welcome. Before I tell you what happened after that, I want to stop and ask you something, because I read every message people leave me and I hold each one. Have you ever been made to feel small by somebody you carried on your own two shoulders? Have you ever swallowed a word so a room full of people would not have to watch you bleed? Tell me where you are watching from tonight and what the hour is in your corner of the world, and stay close with me. Because this is not a story about being humiliated. This is a story about what the world calls small and what heaven calls a calling. Now let me carry you back, because to understand that glass table, you have to understand the counter I stood behind for most of my life. I was born in a house where the plumbing ran cold and the pantry ran thin, and I left school in the 10th grade because my mother's hands had gone bad with the arthritis and somebody had to work. I do not tell you that for pity. I tell you so you understand that I know exactly what a diploma is, and exactly what it is not. I know it is a door. I also know some of us were made to build the house the door hangs in. I took a job washing pots in the basement kitchen of the State University when I was 19 years old, and I stayed in that building until my knees begged me to stop, 38 years later. I started at the sink. I ended as the head cook of the main dining hall, the woman who ordered the flour and set the menus and stood at the front of the serving line every single morning at 6:30 before the sun had properly decided to rise. You have to understand what that hall was to a certain kind of student. The university took all kinds. It took the senator's son with the good watch and the easy laugh, and it took the boy from the county 2 hours south, who arrived with everything he owned in a garbage bag and a look on his face like he was waiting to be told he had made a mistake coming. I fed them both the same, but I watched the second kind. Lord, I watched them. I learned to read a young person's hunger the same way I could read whether the bread had proofed. There is a hunger for food, and there is a hunger underneath it, the fear that you do not belong in the room. And the two of them wear the same thin face at 7 in the morning. That is why I kept the box. Behind my counter, down low where the health inspector never thought to look and never would have minded if he had. I kept a plain tin box, and I called it my blessing box. In it, I kept $10 bills folded small, a few bus tokens, safety pins, a spare pair of gloves, cough drops, and a little notebook. When a boy came to my counter 3 days running and only ever took the free bread and the free water because that was all his meal plan had left on it, I did not embarrass him. I would slide a heaping plate across and say it was a mistake in the kitchen. We made too much. Do me a favor and eat it before it goes to waste. When a girl came through crying and trying to hide it, I would tuck a folded bill into her coat pocket at the register and tell her the coat looked cold. I wrote none of their names in that notebook. I only wrote the amounts, small numbers, a running tally between me and God, receipts I never expected to see returned in this life. My Walter used to tease me about it. "Thelma," he would say, "you're going to feed us into the poorhouse, feeding everybody else's babies." And then he would hand me another folded 10 to put in the tin, because that was the kind of man I married. So when my daughter told me I was too ignorant to grasp her own daughter's college money, you can imagine that a small, hard thing turned over inside my chest. But I did not let it show. I have found that the people who love you the least are the quickest to tell you what your love is worth, and I long ago decided I would not argue my worth at a dinner table. I would let it be shown, in time, by hands other than my own. Now hear me out about Renee, because I will not have you hating her, not yet, and maybe not ever, because she is mine, and I made her out of the little I had. Renee was a bright child, brighter than the room she was born into, and she knew it early. I raised her on a cook's wages in a 2-bedroom rental with a water stain on the ceiling shaped like the state of Florida. I ironed my uniform every night so it would look like we had more than we did. I sent her to the good high school across town on a bus that took an hour each way, and I waited in the financial aid line at that very university for my own daughter years before I ever imagined standing there for Alicia. Renee got her degree. Then she got another one, a master's in business. The kind of degree that comes with a firm handshake and a way of talking that makes cafeteria workers feel like furniture. She married well. She bought a house with a foyer, an actual foyer, and she filled it with the sort of quiet, expensive things that do not have prices on them because, if you have to ask, the room is not for you. And somewhere in that climb, she grew ashamed of the counter I stood behind. She never said it in so many words at first. It came out sideways. It came out when she would tell her new friends I worked at the university and let them assume I taught there. It came out when she stopped bringing Alicia by the dining hall on visits home, the dining hall where that baby had once sat on my hip while I stirred a pot the size of a bathtub. It came out at her own wedding, where she seated me at a back table and introduced me to her husband's mother as my mom. She's in food service, in a voice that closed the subject like a cabinet door. I saw all of it. A mother sees. But I had learned a long time ago in that kitchen that you cannot cook a bitter thing into something sweet by stirring it harder. You have to let some things simmer low and slow, covered, until the Lord decides they are done. So I loved my daughter across the distance she kept building, and I kept showing up, and I kept my counsel and my faith and my little tin box, and I waited without even knowing that I was waiting for anything at all. Now, that night at the glass table, when Renee slid the folder away and told me to keep out of it, here is the thing I could have said and did not. I could have told her that I had read more financial aid packets than any counselor on that campus, because for 38 years I had held the hands of children trying to make the numbers work, had helped 100 of them figure out which scholarship stacked on which grant, had learned every form the government printed, because when a hungry kid asks you for help you learn fast, or you watch him drop out. I might have reminded her of the twice in my life I had quietly covered a student's tuition shortfall out of my own pension, sent it anonymous through the bursar's office so the child would never carry the weight of knowing. I could have told her that the very school she was so proud to send her daughter to had a name for me among a certain kind of alumnus. A name they said soft and warm, and it was not food service. I said none of it. I picked up my worn leather box and I told Alicia I was proud of her, and I meant it down to the floor of my soul. Then I drove home to the small house Walter and I had finally managed to buy, and I sat at my own kitchen table in the dark, and I opened the tin, and I looked at all those little numbers in my own handwriting. Receipts God never let me see, and I said out loud to an empty room, "Was any of it worth anything, Lord? Or was I only ever a woman who fed people and got forgot?" I did not get an answer that night. But an answer was already on its way to me. It had been on its way for 38 years. It just had a great many signatures still to gather first. Let me carry you into that dining hall, because I want you to see it before I tell you what it grew into. It was a long, high-ceilinged room with tall windows on the east wall, and in the mornings the light came in low and gold and landed on the steam rising off the grits. I ran the hotline. That meant I was the first face most of those students saw each day, before a single professor, before a single roommate who might or might not be kind. I made a study of that first minute. A young person will tell you the whole truth of their week in the first minute, if you know to listen and you do not make them use words. Slumped shoulders and no eye contact meant a bad grade or a bad phone call from home. A tray with only the cheapest items on it morning after morning meant the meal plan was running dry and there was no more money coming. I remember a boy I will call by only his first name, because he would not want me telling tales, though the Lord knows the whole state knows his last name now. Elijah. He came through my line that first September looking like a strong wind would take him off his feet. County kid. First in his family to go anywhere past the 11th grade, a scholarship that covered tuition and not $1 more. He was getting by on the free rolls and tap water and pretending he was not, and I watched him lose weight through October like a coat losing its stuffing. So one Tuesday I did what I always did. I slid a full plate across the steel and I said, "Baby, the kitchen made too much sausage again and I cannot have it going in the trash on my watch. You would be doing me a Christian favor to eat it." He held my eyes a long moment, and something in him understood that I understood, and he took the plate, and he did not cry, though it cost him not to. I fed that boy hot breakfast off the books every single school day for 4 years. I never once wrote his name down. I only wrote the number, small and quiet, in the little notebook in my tin. Multiply Elijah by hundreds and you have my life. There was the girl whose winter coat was really a spring jacket she pretended was warm enough, so I mended a real one from the lost and found and left it hanging on her hook at the work-study desk, with a note that said a friend outgrew it. There was the young man who fainted at the register during finals because he had decided sleep and food were luxuries he could not afford at the same time, and I sat him down in the back by the ovens and fed him and prayed over him quiet while the pancakes cooked. There were the freshmen far from home in the first hard flu of the season, and I would fix a tray of broth and crackers and ginger tea and have a runner carry it to the dorm, no charge, from a kitchen that officially did not do such things. When one of them was truly sick, sick enough to be scared, I prayed. I have never believed the Lord needs me to bully a frightened child into faith. I just held a hand and said the words low, and more times than I can count a shaking kid held on and steadied. Twice, and only twice, I did the larger thing. There was a young woman in the spring of my 49th year who was 3 weeks from graduating and $1,100 short on a fee that the school, in its wisdom, would not waive. And without it, she could not walk and could not get the paper that made all 4 years mean something. I knew, because she reached my register gray-faced and told me, not asking for anything, just needing to say it to a face that would not judge her. I went to the bursar's office on my lunch and I paid it. And I asked the clerk, a friend of mine named Rosa, to record it as an anonymous gift so the girl would carry no debt of shame to go with the debt of money. I did the same thing again years later for a young man in almost the same fix. $2,000-odd, all told, out of a cook's pension given to strangers, recorded to nobody. Walter and I ate cheaper that season, and he never said a word about it except to squeeze my hand in church. I remember that young woman clear as morning, the one who was 1,100 short of walking. Loretta, I will call her, though that was not her name. She stood at my register with her tray shaking in her hands, and she was not crying, she was past crying. She had that flat gray look a person gets when hope has run out and they are just going through the motions of a body. "You all right, baby?" I asked her. "You do not look right to me." "I'm fine, Mrs. Boyd," she said, which is what they always say. "You are not fine. Sit down over there by the ovens where it's warm and tell me what's wrong, and do not you dare tell me fine again, because I have been reading faces across this counter longer than you have been alive." So she sat, and it came out of her in pieces. 3 weeks from her degree, first in her family, her mother cleaning houses to help her through, and the school had hit her with a fee nobody warned her about, and she did not have it. And without it she could not walk, and could not get her diploma, and all 4 years would turn to smoke. "How much?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I can't get it. My mama already gave everything she had." "How much?" "Loretta, $1,100, she whispered, like the number itself was a shameful thing. I did not tell her right then. I have learned that if you hand a proud person charity to their face, you take something from them even as you give. So I only said, "The Lord is bigger than $1,100, baby. You go on and study for your finals, and let him worry about the fee." And that afternoon I went to the bursar's office, and I found my friend Rosa at the desk. "Rosa," I said, "I want to pay a girl's fee, but I do not want my name anywhere near it. Can you put it down as a gift from nobody?" Rosa looked at me over her glasses. "Thelma, that's $1,100. That's real money for you." "It is real money for her too," I said. "The difference is I have a roof and a husband and a pension, and she has a mama cleaning houses. You put it down anonymous, Rosa, and you take it to your grave." And she did. That girl walked 3 weeks later, and she never knew whose hand it was, and I stood at the back of the ceremony in my good coat and watched her cross that stage, and I cried like she was my own. Loretta is a school principal now, somewhere up north. I saw it in the paper years later. I never told a soul it was me. I am only telling you now because the woman is grown and safe, and the secret cannot shame her anymore. I told Walter that night, because I told Walter everything. He was at the table with his coffee, and I said, "I did a thing today. I paid a girl's graduation fee. $1,100 out of the savings." He did not even look up from his paper. He just said, "Which savings, the vacation or the roof?" "The vacation," I said. "Good," he said. "We wasn't going anywhere anyhow. My knees don't like the beach." And then he set down his paper and looked up at me, and he said, "Thelma Boyd, do you know what you are? You are the richest broke woman in this state. You give away money we don't have to children who can't pay us back. and somehow the bills still get met every month. I have stopped trying to understand it. I have decided it is the Lord's arithmetic, and it does not use the same numbers as the bank. You are not angry? I asked him. Angry? He laughed that big laugh. Woman, I married you because you fed a hungry stranger the first day I met you, out of a lunch you couldn't spare. You think 30 years was going to change you? I would be more worried if you came home and told me you kept your money to yourself. That would not be the woman I married. Now come sit down. Your coffee's getting cold, and tell me the girl's whole story. Start from the top. I want to hear it. That was my Walter. He is the reason I could give as freely as I gave. A woman cannot pour out year after year if there is not somebody at home filling her back up, and that big bakery truck man filled me up for 31 years with nothing more complicated than believing I was exactly who I was supposed to be. When he squeezed my hand in church, that was the whole conversation. That squeeze said, I saw what you did. I am proud of you. Do it again tomorrow. You do not need degrees to say a thing like that. You just need to mean it clear down to your bones. Now I want to be plain with you, because this is the part the world gets wrong. I did not do any of it to be seen. If I had wanted to be seen, I chose the wrong life. I did it because I believed, and I still believe, that a plate of hot food set down in front of a scared child is a kind of prayer you can chew. I believed my counter was an altar the university did not know it had built. That belief was the whole of my education, and no institution had granted it. And no institution, I thought, ever could. So you can understand that when Renee told me at that glass table I was too simple to understand, the wound did not land where she aimed it. She thought she was telling me I did not have letters after my name. What she was really telling me, without knowing it, was that she had never once seen the altar. She had grown up on the wages that counter paid, had been rocked to sleep by a woman who came home smelling of onions and grace, and she had decided somewhere along the climb that the smell was something to be ashamed of. That is the part that hurt. Not the word uneducated, the blindness behind it. I went to church that Sunday, the same one I had attended for 40 years. Greater Faith on Alder Street, and I put my tithe in the plate the same as always. I have tithed on every dollar I ever earned, including the pension, including the little bit of interest, because I made a promise to God when I was a hungry girl that if He ever put me in a position to feed others, I would give the first 10th back to Him without complaint. I did not complain that morning either, though I will admit to you I wanted to. I sat in my pew and I listened to Pastor Green and let the music do its slow work on the hard thing in my chest. And that Sunday is when the second thread of this story walked through the door. He came in during the second hymn, a tall black man somewhere in his 40s in a good gray suit, the kind of man whose posture tells you he has spent time in rooms where posture is graded. He sat in the back. I noticed him because I notice everybody, an old cook's habit, and because there was something around his eyes I felt I had met before without being able to place it. After the service he came to me directly, past a dozen other folks, and he took my hand in both of his and he said, "Mrs. Boyd, you will not remember me, but I have been trying to find you for a long time." I told him that I was sorry. My memory for faces was not what it used to be, though my memory for hunger never failed. He smiled at that, a wide, sudden smile, and for just a second the good gray suit fell away and I saw a thin, frightened boy standing at my line with a garbage bag of belongings, and my breath caught. "You fed me," he said, "for 4 years. You told me the kitchen always made too much." His voice went unsteady on the last words. "It never made too much, did it, Mrs. Boyd?" I could not think what to say. In all those years, hardly any of them ever came back. They graduate, and they scatter as they should off into their good long lives, and you are glad for it, and you do not expect a thing. So to have one standing before me in the aisle of my own church, grown into a man, with tears standing in his eyes, undid something in me. I asked him his name. He told me, and I will hold it back just a little longer, as I did that morning, because I did not yet grasp what he had become, or why he kept coming to see me. I only knew he started appearing at Greater Faith most Sundays, always in the back, always finding me after, always asking me gentle, careful questions about the years I had worked and the students I remembered, and whether I had ever, in all that time, received so much as a letter of thanks from the school itself. No, I told him, honest. But I never worked for the thanks. I worked for them. You do not feed a child so the child will thank you. You feed a child so the child will live to feed another one someday. He looked at me a long moment when I said that, like a man who has found the exact thing he came looking for and needs a second before he can pick it up. Say that again, he said quietly. So I did. And I saw him carry it away with him like a coal to light a fire I could not yet see. I thought he was just a kind soul circling back to say a late thank you. I thought I was an old woman being paid a small sweet courtesy in the autumn of her life. I had not grasped that I was being interviewed. I could not see that every gentle question was a signature being gathered, a piece of evidence being laid on a scale, a case being built quietly on my behalf by people I had fed and forgotten while they had spent years unable to forget me. The receipts the Lord never let me see were being counted at last, and the woman they belonged to was still driving home alone on Sunday afternoons, wondering if her life had come to anything at all. If the glass table dinner had been the whole of it, I could have let it go. The Lord knows I had let go of harder words from harder people, but my daughter was not finished with me. And the weeks that followed were the weeks that nearly broke the quiet thing I had carried my whole life. I mean to set them before you honestly, without softening Renee into a monster, because she was never a monster. She was a frightened woman who had climbed so far from where she started that she had begun to believe the climb was in danger of dragging her back down, and she had decided her own mother was the rope she needed to cut. It started with the send-off. Alicia was to leave for the university at the end of August, and Renee planned a proper afternoon party in that house with the foyer, catered, with linen napkins folded into little peaks and a banner over the mantel. I offered to cook. Of course I offered to cook. I had been cooking for that child since before she could hold a spoon, and there is not a dish in this world I make better than the ones I make for my own blood. Renee took a slow breath, the breath she takes before she says a thing she has rehearsed, and she told me she had already hired a caterer, someone modern, someone who did small plates, and that anyway she would rather I not, quote, make a fuss in the kitchen while her guests were there. Her guests, colleagues from the firm, a vice president she wanted to impress, the parents of the sort of children Alicia was meant to befriend now. Then she said the thing. She said it kindly, which is somehow always worse. Mama, I love you, but I need this day to be about Elisa's future, not about where we came from. Some of my people, they don't know that side of things, and I would just as soon keep it simple. Maybe you could come by the next day, when it's just family. I understood her perfectly. She did not want the woman in the food service polo standing in her marble kitchen where her vice president could see. She was ashamed of me at the very party meant to launch her daughter into the world I had spent my life quietly holding open for children exactly like that daughter. I did not argue. I said I would come by the next day. And I hung up the phone, and I stood in my own small kitchen, and I felt something I had not let myself feel in decades. Which was foolish, I felt like a fool for every plate I had ever slid across that steel counter, believing it added up to something a person could be proud of. It got worse before it got better, as these things always do. There was a church luncheon a few Sundays on, the kind where the whole congregation eats together in the fellowship hall, and Renee came, which she rarely did anymore, because Pastor Green was honoring some of the young people bound for college, and Alicia was among them. I was serving, naturally. I always served at those luncheons. It was my joy. And I was ladling out my greens when I overheard my daughter talking to a cluster of the other mothers near the coffee. She did not know I could hear. She was telling them, in that smooth, firm, trained voice, that she had, quote, made sure Elisa understood that education was the only way to avoid, and here she gestured with her chin, vaguely, toward the serving line, toward me. A lifetime of that. A lifetime of that. She used my whole life as the cautionary tale she frightened her daughter with. Do well in school, baby, or you will end up like your grandmother, ladling greens for other people's children until your knees give out. I did not drop the ladle. I am proud of that. 38 years of standing in front of hungry strangers teaches you how to keep your face still while your heart does whatever it needs to do behind it. I kept serving. I smiled at the next child in line and I asked did she want cornbread with that, and I gave her an extra piece because she looked like she could use it, and inside me a small door I had held open my whole life swung quietly shut. That was the night I packed away my apron. I had retired from the university 2 years earlier, but I had kept the aprons, the good heavy ones, and I still wore one nearly every day, for the church, for the neighbors, for the simple habit of a woman whose hands need to be useful. That night I took them down off the hook by my back door, and I folded them, and I put them in a box in the hall closet, and I told myself I was done. Not done cooking. You cannot make me done cooking. But done believing it meant anything past the plate. Done believing there was any weight to it, any dignity in it, any receipt anywhere with my name on it. If my own daughter, the person who knew best what that life had cost, could hold it up as the thing to be avoided, then who was I to argue with her degrees? I did not tell the man from church any of this. He kept coming, kept sitting in the back, kept finding me after. But that autumn I had gone quiet with him too, and he noticed. One Sunday he sat down beside me on the bench outside the fellowship hall in the cool October air, and he did not ask his usual careful questions. He just said, "Something has gone out of you, Mrs. Boyd, since summer." And because he was a stranger who was not quite a stranger, because he had once been a boy I fed and now he was a grown man with kind, steady eyes, I told him. Not all of it, but enough. I told him my own child thought my life was a warning, and that maybe she was right, and that I had begun to wonder whether feeding people was just a nice word for being used up. He was quiet for a long while. Then he said something I would not understand until much later. He said, "I need you to hold on through the spring, Mrs. Boyd. Can you do that for me? Just, whatever you are feeling, hold on until the spring." I asked him what was in the spring. He said, "Commencement." And then he smiled that sudden wide smile and changed the subject, and I figured he was talking foolishness. An old graduate getting sentimental about caps and gowns. I had no idea he was telling me the date of my own vindication and asking me, gently, not to give up before I lived to see it. Because here is what was happening while I was folding my aprons into a box in the dark. All across that state, and well beyond it, the children I had fed were grown. They were doctors now. They were teachers and engineers and pastors and nurses, and one, I would learn, a judge. They had scattered exactly as they should into their good long lives, and it turned out they had carried me with them the whole way. They talked about me at reunions. A doctor in one city would meet a teacher from another and discover, over dinner, that the same old cook had fed them both off the books, had mended a coat, had covered a fee, had prayed over a fever in a strange cold dorm. They had a name for me among themselves, the one I told you I would hold back. They called me the kitchen mother. And the man from my church, the one in the good gray suit, the thin, frightened boy grown tall, he had spent the better part of a year finding them, one by one, gathering their stories and their signatures onto a petition, because he had come into a position at that university that let him do something about a debt the whole institution owed and had never paid. He had risen, you see. The scared county boy with everything he owned in a garbage bag had gone on to earn every degree there was and had come back to the very university that once nearly starved him and had become, of all things, the dean of students. Dean Caleb Ellery. The man responsible for the well-being of every young person who now walked through the doors I had once stood guard over with a plate and a tin box. He had spent a year quietly building a case, and I, folding my aprons in the dark, certain my life had come to nothing, knew none of it. I want to stop here and say something to you directly, whoever you are, wherever you happen to be sitting tonight. Because I know some of you are in your own dark autumn right now. I know some of you are folding away the thing you were proud of, because somebody you love told you it was small. I need you to hear me. You do not always get to see the receipts. Most days you will not. You will feed people and mend people and pray over people and go home alone and wonder if any of it landed anywhere. But the not seeing is not the same as the not counting. Somewhere, someone is keeping the tally you cannot see. I would learn that in a folding chair under an open sky with my daughter weeping 3 rows away. But I am getting ahead of myself. Bear with me while I show you how the spring came. First, though, I owe you the deeper part of the story, the part underneath the part. Because a reckoning only means something if you understand the whole weight of the life that earned it. So sit with me a while and hear about Walter, and about how the tin box came to be, and about the true cost of 38 years, which was never in the dollars. I married Walter Boyd when I was 22, and he was 24, and he drove a delivery truck for a bakery, which is how we met, because he brought the bread to my basement kitchen 3 mornings each week. He was a big, gentle man with flour on his forearms and a laugh you could hear through a closed door. We were poor in money, and rich in the things poor people learn to be rich in. We could not have but 1 child, though we prayed hard for more, and that 1 child was Renee, and we poured into her every hope 2 working people can pour into a single vessel. Walter worked that truck for 31 years. I worked my line. Between us we made a life the width of a hallway and the height of heaven, and I would not trade 1 hour of it. It was Walter who first put money in the box, though it was not a box then. It was just my apron pocket. I had come home one night troubled about a girl on my line who was clearly going without, and I confided I had a mind to slip her a few dollars, but I would not shame her. Walter listened, and then he went to his wallet, and he took out a $10 bill and folded it small, and he pressed it into my hand and said, "Then do it so she never has to know it was charity. Make it a mistake in the kitchen. Make it a coat somebody outgrew. A person can take a blessing they cannot take as a handout." That was the whole invention of it, right there, in our little kitchen, out of a bakery driver's wallet. The tin came later, when the folded bills got to be more than an apron pocket could hold. I kept it low behind the counter, and I kept the little notebook because Walter told me to. "Not so anybody ever pays you back," he said. "So that on the days you doubt, you can count what you have done and remember it was real." My husband, who never finished high school either, understood something about the human heart that no degree has ever taught anyone. Walter died in the spring of my 63rd year. His heart, which had held so much, simply stopped one Tuesday afternoon in his chair. I found him looking peaceful, and I sat with him a long while before I called anyone, and I have never told a living soul what I said to him in that hour. After the funeral, the church filled with people, and a great many of them were young, and I had not learned until the repast that a number of them were students I had fed years before, who had seen the notice and driven hours to stand in the back of my husband's service. One of them, a young doctor now, took my hand and said, "Mrs. Boyd, your husband's bread got me through my first year. You would send it home with me on Fridays." I had forgotten that. Walter used to load day-old loaves from the bakery into my car so I could pass them out. I had forgotten, but the boy had not. Even then, in my grief, I did not understand what that forgetting on my side and remembering on theirs would come to mean. I only felt, for a moment at my husband's repast, the faint warm edge of a tally I could not see. After Walter, the counter was my whole life, which is why the university mattered so much, and why leaving it 2 years later took a piece of me. I did not want to retire. My knees made the choice for me, and the doctor made it plainer, and I stepped down the June I turned 64. They gave me a sheet cake with my name spelt wrong in icing, and a certificate in a plastic frame, and a handshake from an assistant dean who could not quite remember which building I worked in. That was the sum total of the thanks the institution itself ever offered me, and I would ask you to hold on to that detail, because it matters later. 38 years, and a cake with my name misspelled. I was not bitter about it. I had never worked for the institution. I had worked for the children. But it does tell you something about how invisible the woman at the counter can be to the very machine she keeps running. So when Renee cut me at the glass table, she was only saying out loud what the whole world had always quietly assumed, which is that a woman who feeds people is a woman who could be anyone, replaceable, unskilled, uneducated, small, and I had begun, that hard autumn, to believe it. I had folded my aprons. I had gone quiet in church. I had started, God forgive me, to eye that old tin box on my closet shelf like a thing I ought to throw away, a monument to a foolishness, a shrine to a life that had fed everyone and been valued by no one. There is a night I nearly did throw it out that you ought to hear, because I think some of you have had a night like it. It was late January, bitter cold, and I had been to a family supper where Renee spent the meal talking about Alicia's roommate's father, who was some kind of surgeon, and never once asked me a question or met my eye, and treated me, in my own daughter's home, like an elderly guest she was obligated to tolerate. I came home and I got the step stool, and I took the tin down from the closet shelf, and I carried it to the kitchen, and I set it by the trash. I opened it one last time. There were the folded bills I had never spent, the safety pins, the notebook. I opened the notebook and I looked at all those little numbers in my own hand, going back decades. Hundreds of small mercies with no names attached, and I thought, this is the record of a woman nobody remembers. And I raised it over the can. And I could not do it. My hand would not open. Because in that moment I heard Walter, plain as if he stood behind me, saying what he said the day he invented it. So that on the days you doubt, you can count what you have done, and remember, it was real. And I put the tin back on the shelf, and I wept at my own kitchen table for the second time in this story, and I said, "All right, Lord. I do not understand it, and I cannot see it, and my own child is ashamed of it. But I will not throw it away. I will hold on." I had no notion I was making the exact promise Dean Ellery had asked of me on that bench in October. Hold on to see the spring. I made that vow to God without knowing I was making it to the both of them. The winter was long. Renee and I spoke less. Elisa, bless that child, called me on her own now and then from her dorm. Quiet, careful calls, and I could hear in her young voice that she was caught between a mother she was afraid to cross and a grandmother she was not allowed to be proud of. And I never put that girl in the middle. I only told her I loved her and asked was she eating enough and warm enough, because those are the two questions a kitchen mother will always ask. World without end. And Dean Ellery kept coming to church and kept saying, whenever the doubt showed on my face, the same 4 words. Hold on. Nearly there. I thought he was being kind to a sad old woman. He was counting down a clock only he could see. There is one February evening I have to give you whole, because it is the night the dean first came to my house, and because it shows you how patient the Lord and his people can be when they are building something you are not allowed to see yet. It was snowing a little, the wet kind that does not stick, and I heard a knock, and there he stood on my step in his good coat holding a sweet potato pie under a dish towel. I hope you do not mind, he said. My wife made 2. I told her there was a lady from church who ought to have one. You drove across town in the snow to bring an old woman a pie, I said, holding the door. Get in here before you catch your death, and do not track that slush on my floor. He laughed and stamped his boots and came in, and I sat him at my kitchen table, the same table where I had nearly thrown my tin box in the trash, and I put on coffee and we talked. Or rather, he asked, and I answered, because he had a gift for putting a question so soft you did not notice you were opening up. Tell me about the hardest year, he said. In the dining hall, the one that nearly beat you. 1990-something, I said. There was a flu that went through the dorms like fire through a dry field. Half the freshman class down sick, homesick, feverish, calling their mamas long distance and crying. And the school, in its wisdom, would not let us send food out of the hall. Health code, they said. So you know what I did. Tell me. I made up trays anyway. Broth, crackers, ginger tea, a little dry toast. And I found me a work-study boy with a strong back and a kind heart, and I said, son, I mean to fill this tray. And then I aim to look out that window over there real hard, and I cannot be held responsible for what walks out the door while my back is turned. And that boy carried soup to sick children all over that campus for 2 weeks, and nobody died lonesome and starving in a cold room. And the health inspector never knew a thing. The dean was writing something in a little notebook. I figured he was just one of those men who likes to keep notes. You could have lost your job, he said. I could have. But you tell me, what is a job worth if you keep it by letting a child suffer? I would rather answer to the school board than to the Lord for that one. Some rules are made by men who never went hungry a day. You learn to tell the difference between a rule and a wall. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, Did anyone ever thank you? The parents. The school. Baby, the parents never knew my name. The school gave me a cake when I retired with the wrong name in the icing. That is the whole ledger of my thanks, and I made my peace with it long ago. I refilled his coffee. Now why does a dean of students care so much about an old cook's flu season? You have been circling me since October like a hawk that has decided to be gentle. He held my eyes a long moment, and I watched him decide not to tell me something. Because I was one of those children, he said finally. And I have spent my whole grown life trying to work out how a woman with nothing kept feeding people who could give her nothing back. I am still working on it. There is nothing to work out, I told him. You feed people because they are hungry. You do not need a reason past the hunger. My own mother fed folks off a stove that barely worked, and a house with the plumbing gone cold, and she used to say, Thelma, The Lord did not put extra on your plate so you could admire it. He put it there so you would notice who has none. That is the whole philosophy. That is my entire schooling. Right there, from a woman who could not read past the 3rd grade. He wrote that down too. And before he left, standing at my door with the snow coming soft behind him, he took both my hands and he said, "Mrs. Boyd, I am going to ask you again what I asked you on that bench. Will you hold on until the spring? Whatever the winter is telling you about yourself, will you promise me you will hold on to see it?" "You keep saying that," I said. "What in the world is coming in the spring?" "Something you have earned," he said. "That is all I can tell you. Promise me." "All right," I said, half laughing at him. "I promise. Now go home to your wife before this snow gets serious." I shut the door and did not think much more of it, except that it was a comfort to be fussed over by a kind man. And I ate a slice of that pie standing at my counter, and it was very good. Not every visit that winter was a comfort. There was an afternoon in March when Renee came by, and I will give it to you plain, because I refuse to paint myself as a saint who was never provoked. She came to drop off some boxes of Alicia's things she wanted stored, and she stood in my front hall in her good coat, and her eyes went to the 2 frames I had not yet hung, the retirement certificate leaning against the wall, and she made a small sound through her nose, not quite a laugh. "You should throw that old thing out, Mama," she said. "Your name's spelled wrong on it. It's embarrassing." "It is mine," I said, "wrong spelling and all." "A thing does not stop being yours because somebody else was careless with it." She sighed. The sigh she gives when she has decided I am being difficult. "I don't know why you hold on to everything. This little house, all this old furniture, that battered tin on the shelf. You could sell this place and come live near us in something nice. Why do you want to stay down here in the past?" "Because down here is where I know who I am," I told her. "Up there in your something nice, I would just be the mother you are ashamed of, in a better chair. Here I am, Thelma Boyd, and everybody on this street knows what that name means, and nobody up there does." That landed harder than I meant it to. She flinched, and for a second I thought she might say something real. But she just picked up her purse and said, "I don't have time for this today," and she left. And I stood in my hall with my 2 unhung frames, and I thought, Lord, I have lost that girl. I truly believed it that afternoon. I believed my daughter was gone somewhere I could not follow, up a ladder built of degrees and other people's opinions, and that I would go to my grave being her private shame. I had no notion I stood 3 weeks away from a cream envelope with a seal pressed into it. I only knew the March wind was cold, and my own child could not stand the sight of the life that raised her. But Alicia, Alicia was the crack of light under the door all that hard season. My granddaughter phoned me from her dorm on her own when her mother was not around to hear it, and those calls kept my heart beating. "Grandma," she said one night, "can I ask you something? Mama gets so strange whenever anybody brings up the dining hall, but the girls on my floor, when they found out you were my grandmother, they got all excited. There's a senior, Premd. She said you fed her when she was broke. Is that true? Did you feed people for free?" "I fed a lot of folks, baby," I said, careful, because I would not lie to the child, and I would not shame her mother to her either. That was my work. I fed everybody who stood in front of me. No, but for free, when they couldn't pay. Sophia said you told her there was always extra so she wouldn't feel bad, but there wasn't extra. You just made sure she ate. She cried telling me, "Grandma, she's going to be a doctor," and she cried. I had to sit down when she said that. Sophia, I recalled a thin, serious girl who always looked worried about a test. I had let her slip out of my memory. She had not let go of me. "Why don't people know about you?" Alicia asked. "Why does Mama act like it's something bad?" "Your mother is not bad, Alicia," I said. "You hear me on that. She is frightened. Frightened people hide the things they are scared of, and sometimes they get the scared thing tangled up with the wrong thing, and they hide what they ought to be proud of. One day she will sort it out. You be patient with your mama. But baby, do not you ever be ashamed of feeding people. Do not you ever believe the folks who serve are worth 1 ounce less than the folks who get served. Will you promise your grandmother that?" "I promise," she said. And then, quiet, "I love you, Grandma. I wish I could see you." "You will," I told her. "Come the spring, maybe. Everybody keeps telling me about the spring." I had no idea how right I was. I was speaking the dean's own words back without grasping that I was doing it. The whole world, it seemed, was pointing me toward a season still hidden from me, and I was too far down in my winter to lift my head. But lift it I finally did, on an April afternoon, when the heavy cream envelope arrived. The invitation came in April, in a heavy cream envelope with the university seal pressed deep into it, the kind of envelope that means someone somewhere decided you mattered. I almost did not open it. I thought it was a fundraising letter, the school asking a retired cook for money it had never thought to ask her opinion on. But something made me slit it open at my kitchen table, and inside was a formal card inviting Mrs. Thelma Boyd to attend the spring commencement ceremony as an honored guest of the university, with seating reserved near the platform. There was a small handwritten line at the bottom, in a hand I had come to know from the visitor's book at church. It said only, "Please come." It would mean everything, and it was signed Dean C. Ellery. I turned that card over in my hands a long time. I could not make sense of it. Why would a university want a cafeteria cook sitting up front at a graduation, in a reserved chair, like somebody's grandmother of honor? I telephoned the dean, and he was warm and careful, and told me almost nothing. He said the school wished to recognize its longtime staff at this year's ceremony, that I had given more to the place than most, and that he would consider it a personal kindness if I would simply come, dress nicely, and sit where they seated me. He asked me kindly not to make a fuss about it, not to tell too many people, to let it be a quiet thing. I agreed, because he had earned my trust across a winter of Sundays, and because some small ember I had thought was cold stirred a little at the thought of seeing that gold morning light come through those tall windows one more time, even from the outside. I made the mistake of mentioning it to Renee. I should not have. I know that now. But she was still my daughter, and Alicia was finishing her first year and would be at that very commencement watching the seniors, and I thought, foolish and hopeful, that maybe this was a small bridge. I called Renee and told her the university had invited me to sit up front at graduation as an honored guest. There was a silence on the line, and then my daughter, God help her, laughed, not cruelly, exactly, more the laugh of a woman who thinks her mother has been taken in by something. "Mama," she said, "honored guest just means they sit the old staff in a section so it looks good in the brochure. Don't go getting your hopes up like it's about you. And please, if you do go, don't wear that big church hat, and don't go telling people you were the cook, not in front of Elisa's crowd. Just sit quiet and enjoy the sunshine. Stay out of it. Sit quiet." The same instruction, dressed for spring. I hung up, and for one moment the old door tried to swing shut in me again. And then something rose up that I had not felt in a long while, which was not anger, but a kind of stubborn peace. I decided I would go. I would wear my good navy dress, the one I had worn to Walter's brother's wedding, and yes, I would wear a church hat if I pleased. because I was a grown woman who had earned the right to cover her own head. I would sit where they put me, and I would enjoy the sunshine, and whatever the day was or was not. It would be between me and the Lord and the memory of 38 years, and my daughter's opinion of it would have no seat in that row. Alicia called me the night before, and that is a piece of this I hold precious. My granddaughter, 19 and caught between us all year, called me on her own and said, "Grandma, are you coming tomorrow? Please come." Mama said you might not, and I told her I was coming. And I heard her let out a breath, and she said something that near about broke me. She said, "Good, because I told my whole floor about you. About the kitchen mother. Some of the older kids, the seniors, when I said my grandma was Mrs. Boyd, who used to run the dining hall, they got real quiet, and then they all started talking at once about you. Grandma, they know you. Everybody knows you." I did not understand it. I thought she was being sweet. I told her to get her rest and said I would see her come morning, and I hung up and I laid out my good navy dress, my hat, and my low shoes, and I did not sleep much, as you cannot sleep the night before a thing your body knows is large, even when your mind cannot say why. The morning came bright and clean, the kind of spring morning the Lord seems to make special for beginnings. I drove myself to the campus I had not set foot on in almost 3 years. They had built the commencement out on the great green quad, with a raised platform at the front and a warm stone hall rising behind it, and rows upon rows of white folding chairs on the grass, and a deep blue sky overhead with the sun coming through the old trees in long bright shafts. There were banners. One great banner behind the stage read Spring Commencement in the university's colors. Graduates in black caps and gowns were streaming in from every direction, and the whole green was a sea of proud families, and the brass of a small band was warming up somewhere, and I stood at the edge of it in my navy dress and my church hat, feeling very small and very old, and not at all sure why I had come. A young woman with a clipboard and a badge found me before I could find a seat in the back. "Mrs. Boyd?" she said, and when I nodded she smiled like she had won something and took my arm. "We have you up front, ma'am. Right this way." And she walked me down the center aisle, past all those white chairs, past hundreds of families, down to the very front, to a reserved row directly before the platform. And she seated me in an aisle chair with a little card on it that had my name on it, spelled right this time. Mrs. Thelma Boyd. And a small pinned corsage of white roses she fixed to my dress before I could stop her. I felt eyes on me and did not know why. I thought I had been mistaken for somebody important. I kept waiting for the young woman to realize her error and move me to the back where the old cooks belong. And then I saw Renee. She was 3 rows behind me and to the side, with her husband and with Alicia, dressed beautifully, there to watch the ceremony because Alicia's whole freshman class had been asked to attend the sending out of the seniors. Renee saw me being seated in the front row with a corsage and a reserved card, and I watched her face do a complicated thing. Confusion first. Then, a flush of what I believe was embarrassment, the assumption that her mother had somehow made a scene, had talked her way up front, had done exactly the fuss-making Renee had begged her not to do. She half rose out of her chair, as if to come fix it, to come collect her mother from where she did not belong. And a person near her, an older gentleman in the robes of the faculty, leaned over and said something to her, and I saw my daughter slowly sit back down, and I saw her look at me with a question on her face she did not have words for. I gave her a small nod, and I turned to face the front, and I folded my hands in my lap, the same hands, and I waited, with no idea on this earth what I was waiting for. The band struck up. The graduates processed in, the platform filled with the provost and the deans and the trustees in their bright hoods and their medieval robes, and among them Tall in the black and gold of his office, I saw Dean Caleb Ellery take his seat. He found me down front with his eyes, and he smiled, that same sudden wide smile of the boy I had fed, and he pressed his hand flat over his heart and held it there a moment. Just for me. I still did not understand. But my own heart began to pound, because when a man looks at you like that, a man you fed when he was starving, you begin to suspect that the spring he told you to hold on for has arrived, and that it is going to be nothing at all like sitting quiet in the sunshine. The provost rose to the podium, a silver-haired woman with a strong, clear voice, and she welcomed the families, and she said the things people say at these ceremonies about journeys and futures and the light of learning carried forward. I half listened. I was watching the graduates in their long rows, their faces so young and so full, and I was thinking of all the mornings I had fed faces exactly like theirs. Then, the provost's voice changed. It slowed. It took on the weight people use when the real reason arrives. Before we confer this year's degrees, she said, the university wishes to do something it has not done in more than a decade. Each year we grant an honorary doctorate to one person whose life embodies what this institution claims to stand for. Usually that person is a senator, a scientist, a captain of industry. This year the faculty senate received a petition. It was not organized by any office of this university. It came from our own alumni. It arrived with signatures, and then more signatures, until there were over 400 of them, from graduates spanning parts of 4 decades, and it made a single request. I felt the morning go very still around me. The provost lifted a page and read from it. We, the undersigned, ask the university to formally honor the woman who fed us. Many of us would not have graduated without her. She gave us hot meals when our plans ran empty. She mended our coats. She covered our fees in secret. She prayed over us when we were sick and far from home. She never held a title above head cook, and she never once asked for thanks. We hold degrees from this school. She is the reason. We ask the university to give her the recognition it never did. A murmur moved through the crowd. I did not connect it to myself. I want you to understand that even then, even hearing those words, I did not think they meant me. I thought, isn't that a lovely thing? Some other cook, some woman at another school, and my eyes filled up on behalf of a stranger. The provost let the page rest. The faculty senate voted unanimously, she said. This morning, by the authority vested in this university, we confer the honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters upon a woman who spent 38 years as the head cook of this university's dining hall. A woman known to a generation of our graduates by a single name they gave her themselves. She paused, and she looked directly down at the front row, directly at me, and she smiled. The kitchen mother. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please rise for Dr. Thelma Boyd? I did not stand. I could not. My name went up into that blue sky over thousands of people. My name, spoken with the word doctor in front of it, and my body simply stopped knowing how to work. And then a sound started that I will hear in my heart until the day I go home to Walter. It began somewhere in the middle of the crowd, in the rows where the graduating seniors sat, and it was chairs scraping and bodies rising, and it rolled outward. The graduates stood first, then their families, then the faculty on the platform. Row by row, that whole green quad of thousands of people came to its feet and turned toward one silver-haired old woman in a navy dress and a church hat in the front row, and they put their hands together, and the applause came over me like weather, like a warm rain you cannot see the edge of. A young man reached me before I understood I had been reached. He was a graduate in his cap and gown, and he knelt beside my chair with tears running down his face, and he took my hand, and he said, You don't remember me, Mrs. Boyd. Freshman year. I was going to drop out. I had nothing. You fed me every day and told me the kitchen made too much. I'm a physician now. I have 3 children. I named my daughter Faith because of you, and behind him came a woman about 40, also weeping, who said, "You gave me a coat." I have never forgotten. I teach 3rd grade now. I keep a blessing box in my classroom because of you, Mrs. Boyd. I keep one for my kids. And then there were more, and more, pressing gently toward the front. A doctor, a teacher, an engineer, a nurse, each one with a handout and a story, each one a receipt, and I understood at last, sitting in that chair with my hand passed from grip to grip, what the Lord had meant all those years when He would not let me see. He had kept it hidden because the accounting was not finished. He was saving it. He was saving all of it for one bright morning, to be read aloud at once. An older woman in a nurse's cardigan pressed close and gripped both my wrists, and she was shaking. "Mrs. Boyd, do you remember the winter the heat went out in the old dorm? You brought us soup. My roommate had pneumonia and no money for a doctor, and you sat up with her in the infirmary and you prayed, and you told the nurse to send the bill to nobody. That was me holding the bowl. I run a whole hospital floor now. I have taught 100 young nurses to look at the scared ones the way you looked at us. I did not have that winter clear in my mind, but I had it clear in hers, and that is a strange and holy thing, to be more real in a stranger's memory than in your own. What was your roommate's name, baby?" I asked her. "Patrice," she said. "She's a pediatrician in Atlanta. She's here today. She flew in for you. We both did. Then you go find her," I told the nurse, "and you two hold each other. And you know that an old woman is looking at the pair of you thinking her whole life was worth it. Every cold morning of it." She kissed my cheek and went. And I watched her go. And I thought that a person could stand at a counter for 4 decades, believing she was pouring water into sand, and be wrong the entire time, and only find out on a single blue morning that every drop had been running downhill into a river she would never have believed was there. Somewhere behind me I heard my daughter's voice, small and cracked, and not at all the firm, trained voice she used on people she thought were slow. I heard Renee say, to no one, to herself, "That's my mother. Oh my God, that's my mother." And I heard her begin to cry, but I did not turn around, not out of spite. I promise you it was not spite. It was that I could not yet carry my daughter's face and this ocean of grown children at the same time. So I kept my eyes forward, and I allowed the tears to run down over the composed mouth Walter used to say could keep a secret through a fire. And I whispered to the only one who had kept the ledger, "Lord, you saw. You saw the whole time." The provost raised her hands to quiet the crowd, and when they had settled back into their chairs, still sniffling, still glowing, she said, "There is more. Dr. Boyd, if you would remain seated one moment longer. The Dean of Students has asked to say a few words and to perform the hooding himself. Many of you will want to hear why." And she stepped back, and Dean Caleb Ellery rose from among the robed figures on the platform, and he came to the podium, and he gripped its edges, and for a moment the tall, dignified man in the black and gold could not speak at all. He just looked at me. And then he found his voice, and he told them everything. 26 years ago, he began, I arrived at this university with everything I owned in a black garbage bag. I want the graduates to hear that, because you are looking at your dean in his robes, and you are thinking he was always this. He was not. I came from a county 2 hours south of here, where nobody in my family had finished high school. I had a scholarship that paid my tuition and left me nothing to eat on. By October of my freshman year, I was surviving on the day-old bread and the tap water in the dining hall, and I was ashamed, and I was hungry, and I was 3 weeks from getting on a bus and going home for good. He looked at me. And then one Tuesday morning, a woman behind the hotline slid a full plate across the counter to me, and she said, "Child, we have gone and cooked far too much sausage again, and I cannot stand to see it go in the trash. You'd be doing me a Christian favor to eat it." It was not too much. I understand that now. There was never too much. She said that to me every single day for 4 years so that I could eat without ever once feeling like a charity case. She learned when my exams were. She kept cough drops for me. My second winter, a coat I could not afford appeared on a hook with a note saying a friend had outgrown it. There was no friend. There was only her. The quad was silent now. You could hear the flags moving. "I am not the only one," the dean said. That is what took me a year to discover. When I came back to this university as dean of students and started asking, I found doctors she fed, teachers she fed, engineers, nurses, a judge, 2 pastors, a woman who runs a shelter, a man who runs a hospital ward. Over 400 of us. She kept a tin box behind her counter. She called it her blessing box. In it she kept folded bills for students who ran short, and a little notebook where she wrote down the amounts. She never wrote our names. She told me once why. She said, "You do not do it to be thanked. You do it so the child lives long enough to turn around and feed somebody else one day." I heard my own words come back to me over a loudspeaker across thousands of people, and I put my hand over my mouth. Twice, the dean went on, and his voice shook now. Twice, that we can document. She paid a graduating student's unpaid fees out of her own pension so they could walk across a stage like the one behind me. She had it recorded as an anonymous gift so the student would carry no shame. She earned a cook's wage her whole life, and she gave it away in the dark. She has no diploma of her own. She left school young to go to work when her mother's hands failed, and I stand here today, dean of students of this university, holding 2 graduate degrees, because when I was starving, she decided I was worth a plate of food and a lie kind enough to let me keep my dignity. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, unashamed, in front of everyone. So when I found her again, sitting quiet in the back of a church, still humble, still certain her life had amounted to nothing, I made her a promise without telling her what it was. I asked her to hold on for the spring. "Dr. Boyd, this is the spring." He lifted a folded academic hood of velvet and satin in the university's colors. "It would be the honor of my life to hood you. Will you come up?" I do not remember standing. I remember Alicia suddenly at my elbow, my granddaughter, having run down from her row, gripping my arm and half laughing and half sobbing, saying, "Come on, Grandma, come on, I've got you, I've got you." She walked me up the ramp to the platform in my navy dress and my church hat, and the crowd was on its feet again, and I stood before that boy I had fed, now a grown man in his robes, and he was taller than me by a foot, and crying like the freshman he used to be. "Bow your head, Mrs. Boyd," he whispered, "just for me. Let me put it on you. You have been putting things on other people your whole life. Let somebody put something on you." I bowed my head. And Dean Caleb Ellery laid the doctoral hood over my shoulders with his own hands, and settled a black velvet tam on my silver hair, and then he lifted a diploma, heavy cream paper with the seal pressed into it, and he turned it so the whole quad could see the words, Doctor of Humane Letters, and he slid it gently into my 2 hands, the same hands, and he held them there around it a moment, and he said, "Read your name, Dr. Boyd. Say it out loud. You've earned the right." And I looked down, and there in black and gold it said my own name, Thelma Boyd. and the doctoral title, and under it the date. And I said my own name out loud into the microphone in a voice I did not recognize as mine, and thousands of people wept with me. But the dean was not finished. He raised one hand toward the side of the platform, and two students pulled a cord, and a great banner unfurled down the warm stone of the hall behind us, bright blue and gold. And on it in letters 100 feet could read stood the words, "The Thelma Boyd Scholarship," and beneath that, $500,000, endowed in perpetuity. The dean leaned to the microphone. "The alumni did not only ask us to honor her with a title," he said. "Titles feed no one. So 400 of the students she fed have done what she taught us to do. We have endowed a scholarship in her name, $500,000 and growing, and every year, forever, it will feed and clothe and carry a first-generation student who arrives here hungry, exactly as we did. Her counter is closed, but her blessing box will never close again. We made sure of it." The crowd came apart entirely then, and I stood on that stage holding my own name in my two hands, with the hood on my shoulders and the tam on my head, and $500,000 of mercy unfurled behind me in my own name. And I looked out, and I found the one face I had not yet let myself find. Renee was standing in the third row, with both hands pressed over her mouth, and she was not the polished Emba anymore, not the woman with the foyer and the vice president to impress. She was a little girl who had just watched the mother she was ashamed of be called doctor by an entire university. Her mascara was gone, her shoulders were shaking. Our eyes met across all those people, and I watched my daughter mouth two words at me, over and over, that I could read even without sound. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And I did not gloat. I need every soul hearing me to understand that plainly. I did not smile in triumph or turn away to punish her. I only looked at my child with the whole of the love that built her, and I gave her one small nod, the nod that says, "I see you. We will talk, not here, not like this." And then I turned back to the microphone, because the dean had stepped aside, and thousands of people had gone quiet, and it was, for the first time in 38 years, my turn to speak. I am not a woman of speeches. I gripped that podium the same as I used to grip the edge of my steel counter, and I looked out at all those faces, and I let the Lord give me the words, because I surely had not prepared any. "I have been standing behind a counter since before most of you were born," I said, "and I never once stood in front of one like this. So you will forgive an old woman if she is slow." A soft laugh moved through the crowd, kind and warm. "They have called me doctor this morning. I will give you the truth about that. I do not have any letters. I left school in the 10th grade because my mother's hands gave out and somebody had to work, and I have washed pots and cracked eggs and ladled greens every day since. For most of my life the world had a word for a woman like me, and the word was small. Uneducated, replaceable. I heard that word again not long ago, from someone I love very much, and I will not say who, because she is here, and she is already forgiven. I did not look at Renee when I said it. I did not need to. I felt the whole crowd feel it. And I believed it. I will not hide it from you young people especially. This past winter I took my aprons down off the hook, and I folded them into a box, because I had decided a life spent feeding people was a life that did not count for much. I had to stop a moment there. The tam sat heavy and strange on my head. But I stand here now to tell you I was wrong, and so was the word. Every plate I ever slid across that counter, every coat, every folded $10 bill, every prayer whispered over a sick child in a cold dorm, The good Lord was writing it all down in a ledger I was not allowed to see. He would not let me see it, and I used to ask him why, on my hard nights. I know why now. He was saving it. He was saving all of it for this one morning, so it could be read out at once, so an old cook could learn in a single hour that not one plate was ever lost. Children, hear me. You will do good in this world, and you will not get to see where it lands. You will pour yourself out and go home empty and wonder if any of it mattered. Do it anyway. Feed people anyway. The receipts are being kept whether you see them or not. The quad was so quiet I could hear a baby fuss somewhere far back and its mother hush it. So I cannot keep this for myself, I said. And I lifted the heavy diploma in my 2 hands. This does not belong to me. I dedicate it, every letter of it, to every hungry child who ever stood at my counter and took only the free rolls and pretended they were not counting on it. I dedicate it to the ones who made it and the ones who did not. And I dedicate it to my Walter, who put the first folded bill in my hand and taught me to give it so nobody would ever feel like charity. Walter, if they let you watch this where you are, baby, we did all right. My voice broke clean in half there, and I let it. And I give it back to the Lord, who saw the whole time. The world called it small. Heaven called it a calling. I know now which one was right. I do not remember sitting down. I remember the sound. I remember Alicia's arms around my neck and her wet face against mine, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Grandma, I'm so proud." I remember the dean gripping my shoulder. I remember the graduates throwing their caps at the end. That bright storm of black squares against the blue, and thinking that I had fed a great many of the hands that threw them. And I remember when it was all breaking up into the milling and the photographs, catching one more glimpse of my daughter, standing apart from her polished friends now, not performing for anyone, just watching her mother be swarmed by grown doctors and teachers who loved her, with a look on her face I had not seen since she was a little girl watching me iron my uniform in the lamplight, trying to make us look like more than we were. She did not come to me at the ceremony. I understood. Some sorrows are too large to hand a person in a crowd. She sent Alicia to say she loved me and she would call, and then she slipped away before the crowd thinned, and I let her go. Because I have learned that mercy sometimes means giving a person the room to be ashamed in private before you ask them to say it to your face. The days after were strange and bright. My little house filled up with flowers and cards from people all over the country. The local paper ran the story, and then a bigger paper picked it up, and for a short while an old cafeteria cook was something people talked about at their own dinner tables, which I found more embarrassing than the 10th grade ever was. A young reporter came to my porch, a nice girl with a recorder and too many questions, and she kept trying to get me to say something bitter, because bitter makes a better headline than grateful. "Mrs. Boyd, when your daughter said what she said at that dinner, weren't you angry? Didn't part of you want to prove her wrong?" "No, baby," I told her. "I did not do a single thing to prove anybody wrong. I fed those children 30 years before my daughter ever said a word. You cannot prove a point you did not know you were going to need. I just lived my life, and the point proved itself. But the university ignored you for 38 years. A cake with your name spelled wrong. Aren't you angry at them? Angry at who? An institution is not a person. It cannot love you, and it cannot see you. Only people can do that, and the people saw me the whole time. I just could not hear them from behind my counter. The letters came late. But the letters came. I am too old to be angry about the timing of a blessing." She turned her recorder off after a while, because I would not give her the story she came for. And then, off the record, she got quiet. And she said, "My grandmother cleaned offices at night. Nobody ever gave her a diploma. And she started to cry, right there on my porch, this professional young woman with a recorder in her lap. "Come here," I told her, and I held her, a stranger's grandchild, and I said, "Then you go home and you tell her tonight. Do not wait for a university to do it. You tell your grandmother tonight exactly what her hands were worth. Do not let it come 38 years late like mine did. You hear me?" "Yes, ma'am," she said. "That is the only story worth printing," I told her. "Go on now." She wrote a good piece in the end. She left out most of my preaching and put in the part about telling your grandmother tonight. And I had 3 different women stop me at the grocery to say they had called their mothers after reading it. That pleased me more than the doctorate did, if I am honest with you. Because a title just sits on a wall, but a daughter picking up a telephone, that is a warm supper. That is the real thing. That is the entire point of everything I ever cooked. The dean laughed when I told him about the reporter. "You had a journalist in tears and no quote for her front page," he said, shaking his head. "You are the only person I know who could turn down being famous." "I had my fill of being unseen," I told him. "I do not need a helping of being seen too big to make up for it. Somewhere in the middle is a plate the right size. I have always known how to serve the right size plate." Dean Ellery came by with the framed diploma and helped me hang it in my front hall, right beside the plastic framed certificate the school had given me at my retirement, the one that came with a sheet cake and my name spelled wrong. I hung them side by side on purpose. I wanted to see the whole arc of it in one glance every time I passed. The thanks the world gives you in the moment, and the thanks the Lord gives you when the accounting is finally done. "You should take that old one down, Mrs. Boyd," the dean said, looking at the cheap frame. "No, baby," I told him. "I am going to leave it right there. That one is the truth about how the world sees you while you are still useful to it. This new one is the truth about what it was all worth. A person ought to be able to see both at once. Keeps you humble and keeps you honest." He laughed, and then he got quiet, and he said, "I never did get to thank you." "Not really. Not the whole thing. You just endowed $500,000 in my name so hungry children can eat forever," I said. I believe the thank you came through. But it was not the dean I was waiting on. And he knew it, and I knew it, and neither of us said her name. Because there was still one person in this story who had called me too uneducated to understand. And the story is not finished, not the part that matters most. Until you hear what happened on my porch 3 weeks later, on a warm evening, when my daughter finally came. I was sitting on my porch in the cool of the day with a glass of sweet tea, watching the light go long and gold over the yard, when Renee's car pulled up to the curb. She sat in it a while before she got out. I let her. Then she came up the walk slow, in flat shoes and no makeup, looking every year of her age and none of her degrees, and she stopped at the bottom step like a woman unsure she is allowed to climb it. "Mama," she said, "can I sit down?" "It is your mother's porch," I told her. "You have never once needed permission to sit on it. Get you a glass. The tea is on the counter." She went in and came back with a glass, and she sat in Walter's old chair, and for a long while neither of us said anything. The crickets started up. Finally she set her tea down, and she put her face in her hands, and my proud accomplished daughter cried the way she had not cried in front of me since she was small. "I called you uneducated," she said into her hands. "In front of everybody. I told my friends your life was the thing to avoid. I told Alicia, God forgive me, I told my own daughter not to end up like you. And then I sat in that chair and watched a whole university stand up for you. Doctors, I watched a dean cry over you. And I realized I did not know you at all, Mama. My whole life I thought I was the one who got educated. I did not know one single thing that mattered. I let her say it. That was important. There is a kind of mother who rushes in to make it easier, who says, "Hush now. Do not cry. It is all right." And by doing that, she picks up the thing her child needs to carry a minute longer. I did not pick it up. I let my daughter feel the full weight of it, because a sorrow you are not allowed to finish feeling just goes underground and comes back later meaner. When she had cried herself quiet, I spoke. "Renee, look at me." She lifted her wet face. "You want to know the truth of it? The word did not hurt me because I believed it. It hurt me because you said it. There is a difference. I knew what I was. I have always known. I stood at that counter 38 years, knowing exactly what I was worth to those children, whether the world had a nice word for it or not. What broke my heart was not that the world could not see me. The world never sees the cook. What broke my heart was that my own child could not see me. You, the one I ironed my uniform for, the one I rode the bus an hour each way to get to the good school. I could stand the whole world calling it small, baby. I could not stand you calling it small. "I know," she whispered. "I know that now." "Do you know why you were ashamed of me?" I asked her, and I said it gentle, not to wound. "Because you were afraid. You climbed so far, so fast, and you were terrified something would reach up and pull you back down to the water stain on the ceiling and the bus rides and the cook's uniform. And you decided I was that thing. You thought if you could just get far enough from where you came from, you would finally be safe. But baby, you cannot get safe by being ashamed of the hands that carried you. All you do is end up ashamed of your own self, because those hands are in you. I am in you. You have been running from the best part of yourself, thinking it was the worst." She reached across and took my hand, my old hand, and she held it against her wet cheek, and she said, "Will you forgive me, Mama? I don't deserve it. But will you? Now, hear closely what I did, and what I refused to do, because this is the whole heart of the matter. I did not say it did not happen. It happened. I did not say it did not hurt. It hurt. I did not pretend 3 weeks and some tears had washed it clean, because cheap forgiveness is just a wound with a bandage over the top, and it festers. But I also did not turn my child away to teach her a lesson. I have buried a husband. I know exactly how many evenings a person gets, and it is never as many as you think. I forgive you, I said. I forgave you the same afternoon you said it, out on the drive home, because I decided a long time ago I would not carry poison for anybody, not even for a hurt I had every right to hold. But Renee, forgiveness and trust are two different animals. I forgive you free. The trust you are going to have to build back, one honest brick at a time. And it starts with this. You will bring Alicia here, to this porch, and you are going to tell her the whole truth about her grandmother, not the food service version. The whole truth. The blessing box. The tin. All of it, because that child is about to go out into a world that will try to teach her the same lie it taught you, that the people who feed and mend and carry are worth less than the people who sit and are served. And I will not have my granddaughter believing that lie. Can you do that for me? Yes, Mama, she said. Yes, I'll bring her Sunday. Then we are all right, you and me, I told her. Now drink your tea before it goes to water. And she laughed, a wet, broken little laugh, and she wiped her face, and we sat on that porch in the gold light until the fireflies came up out of the grass. An old cook and her educated daughter. Both of us finely schooled in the one subject neither degree nor diploma ever taught. She brought Alicia that Sunday, and she told her the whole of it, and my granddaughter listened with her eyes shining. And when it was done, Alicia said, "Grandma, when I graduate, I want to work the Thelma Boyd Scholarship. I want to be the one who finds the hungry kids." And I told her that was the finest ambition I had ever heard out of anybody with a future. And I meant it down to the floor of my soul. I keep the tin box on the front hall table now, out where anyone can see it, right under the 2 frames. I still put folded bills in it. Old habits, and good ones, do not retire when you do. Only now, once a year, the dean brings the new scholarship students by my porch for sweet tea before the fall term. The hungry ones, the scared ones, the ones with everything they own in a bag, and I feed them. And I tell them we made too much again, and I watch them understand that they are seen. My counter closed. My calling never did. The first of those scholarship students came to my porch that very first fall. A slight boy named Andre, with a duffel bag and a jaw set hard against the world. Exactly the kind who used to arrive at my line braced to be turned away. He would not meet my eyes at first. Renee was there, keeping her promise, pouring the tea, learning to be useful in the kitchen she once refused to let me stand in. "They told me your name is on my scholarship," the boy said, careful, like the words might be a trick. "The whole thing. My tuition, my books, a meal card that doesn't run out." "Why would you do this for somebody you never met?" "I had no hand in it, baby," I told him. "The students I fed did it. Hundreds of them. I only cooked. They are the ones who remembered. But it's your name. It is my name, so that every child who gets it knows a cook can be worth remembering," I said. "That is the only reason I let them use it. You take that money and you eat and you study and you finish. And one day, when you are somebody, you find a hungry child of your own and you carry them. That is the entire payment I ever want. You just pass the plate on down the table." He was quiet a good while, and then his hard jaw came undone, and he was just a scared kid on an old woman's porch. "My mama cleans houses," he said. "Like your friend Rosa said yours did the fees. Nobody ever." "I know, child," I told him, and I took his hand. "I know. Somebody sees you now. You are seen. Drink your tea." And across the porch I watched my daughter turn away to the railing so the boy would not catch her crying, and I understood that Renee was not only pouring tea. She was learning, late but true, the one subject her fine degrees had skipped, which is that the whole worth of a life is measured in who you stoop to lift, and never once in who bows to you. So that is my whole story, and I have held nothing back from you. I sat down a cafeteria cook my own daughter called too uneducated to grasp such things. And I stood up an honored doctor with $500,000 of mercy, carrying my name into a future I will not live to see the end of. And the world did it in public, with a cap and a gown and a hood, and my name read out loud, so that I would never again have to argue my worth at anybody's dinner table. If you have made it this far into Thelma's story, then you have sat with me a good long while, and I thank you for it. Truly, before you go, I would love to hear from you. So let me ask you, and take your time before you answer, because there is no wrong answer to this one. When Renee came up that walk with her wet face, would you have opened the door and forgiven her that same evening? Or would you have let her stand on the porch a good while longer and earn her way back slow? Tell me in the comments. And while you are down there, tell me where in this world you are watching from, and what the hour is in your part of it, because I read every single one, and I hold each of you by name. If this story touched your heart, do me the kindness of a like, and subscribe so you can sit with me again, and share it with somebody who has been made to feel small for the good and quiet work they do. Because if there is one thing an old cook learned behind a counter for 38 years, It is this: your worth was never up to the people who failed to see it. Heaven keeps the ledger, and what the world calls small, he has been calling a calling the whole time.